based on another thing that I'm kind of seeing in society right now, and that is that there are a lot of things collapsing right now, and it's kind of surprising. And there are different kinds and the number of things that are collapsing right now. And when I'm saying collapsing, I'm going to use the word collapsing, not shrinking. There are certainly things that are shrinking, but collapsing is a bigger thing. Collapsing is really caving in. And so some of the things that I've seen that are collapsing are evolution as a science. That is collapsing. I don't know if you follow those circles, but the evolution community is limited to just people who call themselves evolutionists, but all the people in the other sciences, biology, genetics, all of those other things, even physics, says what you're saying for evolution just can't happen. It's not possible. We know enough about how things work now that it can't work. So there's just a few people clinging on to this idea of evolution still, and they won't give it up. But it has collapsed. It is there are a lot of people looking for a replacement for evolution now. And the same thing has happened with the Big Bang. And just recently, I did a talk on this new telescope that they have that is seeing farther out than anything and finding things that just blow up the theory of the Big Bang. And so the Big Bang as a theory in cosmology is collapsing right now. There's a whole bunch of people running away, looking for new theories, and there's still some people clinging on, trying to make the old theory work in some way. And so it's going through that same collapse that evolution went through a couple of years ago. And so the Big Bang is collapsing as well as a theory. And I'm not going to focus on either of those two. I'm going to get into detail on a couple others. Globalism is also collapsing. It's hard to see that one right now, but even they recognize that globalism is falling apart. And the US dollar as a reserve currency is part of that globalism movement. Now, globalism wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I'll be talking about this in a little bit in the next slide. But globalism right now is falling apart as the US dollar as a reserve currency also falls apart. So China as an economic power is also falling apart. We've talked about this quite a bit, and they have all kinds of big problems. It's not just economic. They've got population problems, and there's no reason to expect China to come back in a long time. And another thing that I'm seeing here is United States as a country is falling apart. And this one you probably wouldn't have noticed if you didn't know what signs to look for of what it looks like when a country is beginning to collapse. And I'll do another slide on that one too. And so civilization as a whole also is collapsing. I'm noticing this in a lot of the ways that we do business and commerce and even in restaurants, is that we seem to be a whole lot less civilized than we were. And other people have noticed this too, is that they talk about it in terms of the COVID that went through as being the cause, because it seemed like we went into COVID as a civilized country and we came out after COVID as much less civilized country. And I can't say that COVID was really the cause of it, but whatever the cause was, there definitely was a change there that people have noticed, is that we don't seem to be the same people that we were going into COVID. So, but I don't call Christianity collapsing. Other people would. Um, and the reason is that it is growing in some countries. It's actually doing well in countries where there is a lot of persecution. In Muslim countries, in China, for example, Christianity is doing there. In other countries, like in ours, it's shrinking for sure. The stats all show that attendance to churches and people who believe in the Bible, that's all shrinking. The number of people are shrinking. And there are other countries like European countries where Christianity really collapsed a long time ago, and there are very few people who are Christian, truly Christian in any sense, or even refer to themselves as Christian. So I don't call Christianity collapsing because it is growing in places and it's not the same worldwide. But these other areas that I've talked about, and some of them I'm going to talk about some more in detail here, are areas where our collapse is happening. Globalism. Globalism started as a way for countries to exchange goods, and that's a wonderful thing. We were able to get bananas and all sorts of other things that wouldn't grow in our country, and that's great. And so it became a way to exchange goods, and the basis for that was the US dollar, and that worked well. Everybody had US dollars. But now it has become a way to try to control everyone on the planet. And that's not what globalism was supposed to be. But now when we say globalists, we're talking about the people who are trying to control everybody. And people are starting to realize what these globalists are up to, and people are becoming concerned about that. You can see lots of people talking about that even in major newspapers. And so there's a couple people that I saw some videos of just recently. One of them is Klaus Schwab from the WEF, the World Economic Forum. I think that Cynthia has mentioned him before, and certainly the WEF she has referred to before. He, in one of his videos, said there is rising anger against the globalists and the elites. And that's an interesting thing for him to say. He's recognizing something that has happened historically many times. And this is the let them eat cake moment. If you don't know that phrase, let them eat cake, it comes from somewhere around the 1600s, I think it was. It's attributed to Marie Antoinette, who was the wife of the King of France. Speaking of France, um, and um, and it's said that she said this, but it's not certain that she really did say it. But she was told that the people were starving. There was kind of a famine going on, and she said, well, why are they starving? Well, they don't have any bread, she was told. And she said, well, why don't they have any bread? And she said, well, there's no flour for yeast to make the bread. And she said, well, let them eat cake. She didn't understand that cake is also made from yeast because she was too far away from reality. She lived a life in which people catered to her and gave her food, and she had great wealth and didn't suffer like the other people were suffering. And so she was completely out of touch with the people. And when a country gets to that state where the people at the top are so completely distant from the population, what happens is the people say, we don't care for you, you're not like us, and they get up and they chop their heads off. And that's what happened to Marie Antoinette. She was guillotined at age 30, somewhere in her 30s, I think it was. And, and um, and so Klaus Schwab is recognizing that this moment is coming. He says that there is rising anger against the globalists and the elites. And he's right about that. And this leads to something bad. This leads to people in our time probably getting out guns rather than the guillotine. In any case, Klaus has said some other things that show he's really out of touch with the average person. One of them was he said, what he's headed for a world where you will own nothing and love it. And so he's saying, I have this great world planned for you. Nobody will own anything. This is just like a song from one of the Beatles people. You will own nothing and you will love it that way. And so he thinks that we would just love to own nothing and we would share everything and the government would control who gets what and everything would be wonderful like that. And people aren't like that. People don't want that. People want to have some say in their lives. They want to have some control over their lives. And so that's a really out of touch thing to say, and a very Marxist socialist kind of thing to say as well. And another thing that he said is you won't have to vote in elections. And so he says these things out loud because he thinks that they make sense, just like Marie Antoinette thought she was making sense, but he's really out of touch. Voting in elections is how we participate in our government. And he says, oh, we're going to take care of that for you. You won't have to vote in elections. You won't have to go through all this election stuff on the news media and all that stuff. It'll be so much better. Um, we don't want that. He's out of touch. And so this is the reason why there is a rising anger against the globalists is because they are so out of touch now. Now, another person, this guy is from the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. What they do is they're kind of the central bank of all the central banks. When you want to deal with another country and exchange money, the BIS is ultimately the party that takes care of these exchanges of money and the arrangements so that we can actually buy stuff from other countries and they take care of converting the money. So he made a shocking statement. It shocked a lot of people, and that's how I heard of it, was on the news. And he said that, there are $1 quadrillion in derivatives. Now, you've heard of a billion, you've heard of a trillion. A quadrillion is 1,000 times a trillion, so $1,000 trillion. So he says there are $1 quadrillion in derivatives. Now, a derivative I won't explain in any detail, but it's basically insurance on exchanges, and it's really an insurance kind of plan. So if you are trying to do an exchange with somebody and it falls through, the insurance steps in and makes sure you're okay. So these derivatives are like an insurance plan. So what he says is there is $1 quadrillion tied up in derivatives. Almost all of these derivatives are off the balance sheets of the companies who own them. And so when you look at a company, you don't see that it has this high risk, these derivatives that they're involved in, because it's not required for them to put it on the balance sheet. And so there is this massive amount of money, insurance money, that is out there right now. And if things start to go bad, this insurance money is going to cut in, and a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, and more money than the whole world has. So this is where we are. Is we're on the precipice here with globalism. Things are starting to fall apart, and it's really starting to collapse, and it's going to be really bad when it's done. So that's globalism. China is an economic power. Um, China's economic collapse has started. If you follow the news at all, you're already aware of that. Um, and it's going to keep going for quite a while. Um, and China, along with Japan, are the two largest holders of U.S. debt, which is U.S. treasuries. And for quite a while, both of them have been selling their U.S. debt. And this U.S. debt is essentially globalism. It is the way that they would exchange money with us. So if we want to buy something from them in U.S. dollars, we would give them U.S. dollars, and they would give us Chinese yuan, but the yuan would be converted because they have U.S. dollars to convert it, and it all works out to them. We pay in U.S. dollars, and it becomes yuan to them. And so China and Japan have, for the longest time, been the two largest holders, and they've been slowly getting out of that, and which means really the U.S. is already in the process of not being the reserve currency anymore. But what's happened just recently is with this collapse, this economic collapse that China is going through, they've started selling their debt very quickly. They're really getting rid of it now, and what they're doing is buying gold. And this is part of the BRICS movement, but I won't explain that. And so the consequences of that can be very serious to us. One is that the US dollar will no longer be the reserve currency of the world. And that puts us in a position where the debt levels that we have can't be supported and could only have been supported if we were the reserve currency. But now the debts that we have are even looking worse than they do now, because if we aren't the reserve currency, we can't be trusted in the same way. Um, and gold can become scarce. And there's a lot of people who believe that there's a lot of fake gold out there. There's a lot of what's called paper gold. Paper gold are investments that you can buy, and they're basically a promise that when you want, they'll convert that into gold, real gold for you. But there's a lot of people who believe that a lot of this paper gold doesn't actually have any backing. And so if suddenly everybody starts buying gold and gold becomes scarce again, this paper gold is going to become worthless because there's no way to convert it into gold because there's more paper than there is gold. And a lot of people have been concerned about that. And so if we get to that point, that's going to really just throw the whole world over the edge. So bad things there as well. United States as a country. Why did the Roman Empire end, or when did it end? When would you say the Roman Empire came to its official end? Well, it's hard to say that because it didn't happen all in one piece. It always happens in chunks. And so it got smaller in chunks, it got driven out of Rome, and it changed in the process a few times and wasn't the same as it had been. And so because of all these steps that it went through and ultimately vanished, you couldn't go to Italy now and say, oh, here's the Roman Empire still. And so it, it it's always hard to say when these things come to their official end, because they change as they go along. And that's happening in the US right now. There was an interesting case just recently. I think I wrote this 2 weeks ago about the New Mexico governor who created a law all by herself that violates the Constitution of the US. And it was to do with gun law, but I won't get into that. It was a clear violation of the Second Amendment, and she did it because she thought that she'd be able to get away with it. She lives in a state that is very liberal, and she's a liberal governor, and she thought that she'd be able to get away with this. But right away, all of the people who were against this got together and brought it before a judge, and the judge ruled that the law was invalid. And as a result of that, she made a little change and then put it back in effect, but now people are ignoring it anyway. So, and now there's an effort to impeach her and get her out of the governorship and get rid of her. But I don't know if that will succeed because New Mexico is a pretty liberal state. And so she is kind of the model for a state that wants to stay inside of the country, but wants to do whatever they want. And there's a growing number of states like that that want to go their own way and do their own thing on certain issues. And we're seeing that more than more. And that's how a country pulls apart and begins to change and become something different from what it was. And so they're kind of the model state for this idea of we're going to do what we want, but we're going to stay inside of the country. But really, when you do that, you've rejected the authority over you. You've said, the Constitution doesn't rule me. I rule the Constitution, and I decide what parts of the Constitution are going to apply to me. And so that's also a similar problem that Christianity can have about people who are picking and choosing from the Bible. Is if you start picking and choosing from the Bible, you've made yourself over the Bible. You've put yourself in charge of deciding what parts of the Bible are good and bad. And so you've rejected the authority over you. You've rejected God in doing that. So that's New Mexico, but Texas and others are also beginning to ignore the federal power and do things themselves, and that's in their case they're doing things because the federal power is often doing things it shouldn't be doing and that aren't constitutionally supported, and so Texas and others like it are models for states that will probably leave the union, and right now Texas has a Texit movement. There are people lining up to bring that up for a vote in the next vote about leaving the union. And there are other states that are looking at that same idea. They're starting to say the federal government has failed so badly that we need to get out of here. And so these are the two different models that you see that result in the breakup of a country is people inside who want to do whatever they want. So they're not really in the country, but on paper they are, and others who are just going to leave the country. And so I think the United States is looking towards a breakup. It certainly looks like that right now. So that fun little message. Any comments on that? Okay, I will.
Yeah, I mean, we see, just a quick comment. So just, I mean, I see that type of information every day pretty much about the World Economic Forum, Paul Schwab, and, you know, all the minions there. Pretty much they want us to, you know, eat bugs,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it because we're useless eaters.
Yep.
The word eaters, that's what they think about us. And not just, you know, Christians or whatever, but everybody who is not an elitist, who is not a millionaire, billionaire, that's what we are. We're just working bees, useless eaters that are taking up their land because according to them, they are the masters of the universe and they should have servants and be served. And we're taking up all of their land and their resources. And so we're useless to them at this point. So, but yeah, that's, you know, thank you for sharing that as well, Stan. That was a great message.